And we're learning a Sicha of the Rebbe. And we're on page 212. Page 212. The Rebbe is talking about the need for, this is 60 years ago, it's a long time ago. The Rebbe is talking about the need for Chabad institutions to have a permanent place. In other words, not just to rent a space or to borrow spaces, but to actually own a space, or even build a building. And the Rebbe points out that even though the point of the space is the people, but when you have a kviyas, when it comes to place, it's advantageous in terms of bringing the people in. Now, towards the end of the Sicha, the Rebbe starts to talk about his frustration with the fact that the expansion of Lubavitch is not happening at the pace that he would like, and he's attributing it to a tzimtzum. People's minds are very narrow, and they're not thinking in a way that's expansive and big. And he makes reference to something which I heard as a child, that for many, many years, 770 itself was a rather sad space. When the Rebbe became Rebbe, in a very, very short time, the shul, which was the shul upstairs, was far too small, and it took a decade, it took 10 years to build what was called then the first shul. The first shul went until that pole right there. The thicker pole right here. From this wall, that was the whole first shul. That, you see that 45-degree angle, yeah? That 45-degree angle was where the Rebbe's and Chana sat, the Rebbe's mother. So that was the front of the shul. This is the whole length of the shul. This was the women's section. The men went down through the driveway underneath. And the Rebbe and Chana sat at that diagonal, that was her space. And the Rebbe sat opposite her, and they were able to see each other. And she used that spot for the years that she remained alive. Yesterday was her husband's yard site, so I guess it's apropos that we make reference to the fact that the Rebbe had a red chair and she had a green chair, the same kind of a chair that they made for the Rebbe, they made for the Rebbe and Chana. And this was the whole shul. And it was considered big. The story was that when they announced using the new shul, so the Gabbai was Zalman Duchman. The one who made the announcement was a big chassid. It was a serious chassid. Zalman Duchman. So Zalman Duchman said that the tefillah is going to be unten in the groise naya shul, downstairs in the large new shul. So the Rebbe muttered, naya benish grois. It's new, but it's not big. This isn't big enough. Yeah? So when they built it in 1960, there was so much room. But in a very, very short time, that space was filled. And by 1968, they built what's called the second shul. And in 1973, they built the third shul, till the corner, till Kingston. That third building, I was a little boy, but I remember when they broke the wall and they made the shul, 2/5 larger than it had been. So this is 1960. And the new shul was still in the negotiating stages and the building stages. So what used to happen is that they davened in what was called the shalash. There was a sukkah on the side of the building that was up all year round, covered with a tarpaulin, full of holes. And the place was a mess. It was a mess. The drains would get stuffed. There'd be a half a foot of water sitting on the floor. It would be very cold. It would be very hot. The Rebbe was really unhappy. The Rebbe sort of felt like it's the responsibility of Hasidim to build a shul. It's not his job. So finally along came a Yid who was not even a Lubavitcher, Rabbi Klein. And I heard that he said that Yid coming from Russia are used to living in such impoverished conditions. Everything is good enough for them. He says, I'm a Hungarian Jew. I understand a little bit how things should look. I'll build a shul. He built all three shuls. Rabbi Klein was very, very close to the Rebbe. He had a very special relationship with the Rebbe. This is Rabbi Klein. So what happened was, when there were big fabrengens, they would rent halls. In the winter time, that means Yud Kislev and Yud Shvat and Purim, it was cold outside, they would rent halls and the Rebbe would go to the halls. And the Rebbe really didn't like it. The Rebbe used to call it going into Golus. So in the Sicha, he references this fact that there's a lack of breitkeit, a lack of breadth, of vision in Lubavitch. Okay? And I'm going to begin to read on 212. 212, it's the fourth paragraph from the top, near the top of the page. I read this last week. I mean, we've been very intermittent, very inconsistent with the Sichas. Yesterday, I spent the whole time talking about Chafov. We were supposed to learn this yesterday, so we're learning it today. After 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. In Kfar Chabad, yesh mokim larach esvadus. Aber Chamesh Yud, they already built the Beis HaKnesses HaMerkazi, the large shul, and the Rebbe says it's big enough to hold 5,000 people. V'ilu b'mokim, and in this space, sheboy hoya kvei kedushas mervacham yadmur b'meshech asashalom, where the Frierdiker Rebbe worked for 10 years. U'mosa nafshe, and he sacrificed his life v'chulu. Hine, kashenitesef yeseh b'mispa mesuyim, the moment the number of people attending the event is a little bit larger, there's a need for Mesiras Nefesh, to go wandering around the breadth of the city, and to seek and to find, if it's possible to find the space, that they'll agree to have Rachmanis, and to bring Yidden in to say to them a statement of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Ve'erosh teaching. That was referencing the fact that they went to the halls. Now, of course, when they rented a hall, all the halls were around here. They were on Nostrand Avenue. They were nearby, and usually after we used the hall once, they were not interested in having us a second time because the hall needed significant repairs. They should know the Rebbe was very careful about that. If something was broken in a hall, they didn't play around. Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe was very concerned about Chil Hashem. The Rebbe would pay personally to have it repaired. And for 10 years, or 8 years, there was a number of years, there's a Yid, Minkowitz, who made a list of each of the halls that the Rebbe had used for Fabrengens and how many times they used each hall. I think the maximum number of using the same hall was 6 or 7 times. Sahakel was 3 times a year. The hall going into Golos was Yitzchak Kislev, Yud Shvat Purim. Because in the summer, you'd base Tamuz and Chof Menachem, which were the 2 other large Fabrengens, the Rebbe Fabreng here because it was warm. In other words, they didn't worry about the heat, they worried about the cold. So the Rebbe is lamenting it. Now, of course, the Rebbe was certainly in a position, if he wanted to build 770, he could have built 770. But the Rebbe felt that this is not his responsibility. This is the responsibility of the Gaboyim, of the Balabatim. The Rebbe had to worry about the whole world. He literally had to worry about the whole world. And the resources that the Rebbe raised went for chinuch. The money was earmarked for something far more important than walls. But the Rebbe still wasn't happy that other people didn't have the seichel and the initiative to do it. And the Rebbe continues, to be sure, kol zeh shayach laha'avad. This is all in past tense. V'hiratz medevil of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shakiv and Shasi de Eretz Yisrael shetaspashet b'chol ha'aratzes. Naturally, it says in the Chazal that when Mashiach comes, the whole world is going to be Eretz Yisrael. And if the whole world is going to be Eretz Yisrael, so tagia harachvus shel Kfar Chabad, the breadth of attitude and vision of the Kfar Chabad is going to reach mibli sheyigarei etzem, without them losing any of it, la'aretz sabris, to the United States. The Rebbe is saying Kfar Chabad, they built a shul for 5,000 people, and here we can't hold more than 500 people. The Rebbe wasn't happy about it. So he's speaking, the Rebbe's words are divrei Torah, but he's saying it a little bit tongue in cheek. Shegam kan, that even here in 7-7, the Yemokim with tefillah should be a place for davening, avor chameshes alafim yudim, for 5,000 yidden. Umokim in a place, larach hisvados, to make a fabreng, avor chameshes alafim yudim, for 5,000 yidden. Umokim lil meteda, place to learn teda, nigla v'chasidis, avor chameshes alafim yudim, for 5,000 Jews. V'yachakacha sedas alafim, and then for 10,000. This room cannot hold 10,000 people. In the tightest of circumstances, it can hold 6,000, 7. If we're mamish sardines, but it's more than 500. Until a space large enough to accommodate 600,000 Jews. Shehem neshamas koliyas, which are only the general souls. Shemehem nimshacham riben neshamas pratis, from which radiate the many, many individual souls. The Rebbe says we have to have a big enough space for everybody to be able to attend and participate in the Rebbe's Fabrengens. And I want to tell you something parenthetically, which is very interesting and I think very important. I grew up here. This is my world. 770 is my world. My childhood, my adulthood. So every year at Rosh Hashanah there was an announcement made. Every year at Rosh Hashanah, after Shachris, before Kriyas HaTorah, the Gabbai would get up and make an announcement. Rabbi Pinchas Katz, I don't remember Rabbi Yechanan. He passed away when I was 4, so I don't remember his announcements. But the Rebbe and Gordon used to make the announcements. When the Rebbe passed, so they had elections for Gaboyim. Rabbi Pinchas was one of the Gaboyim, and he would make this announcement as long as he lived. He passed away in 1985, and then his son, so Gezunzan Harav Velvel Katz, or whatever, Rabbi Shia Pinson would make the same announcement. And the announcement basically was, everybody behave. That for the entire time of Kriyas HaTorah and Maftir, and the preparation for the Tkiyas and the Tkiyas themselves, everyone should stand in their place. You shouldn't stand on any milk boxes. You shouldn't stand on any benches. The whole shul is standing on milk boxes. The whole shul is standing on benches, saying nobody should stand on any benches. It was a bracha levatala. But this was a yearly announcement. And then he would finish with these words. Medavishn kedishas hayoim and kedishas hamukim. You have to know the holiness of the day and the holiness of the place. Medavisn vi mishtayt and favem mishtayt. You have to know where you're standing and in front of whom you're standing. Now, when I think about this now, I'm a man. I'm not a child. Maybe I'm still a child, but at least I'm an adult child. You're standing in front of the Rebbe. Now, when the Rebbe has his back to you, it's not the pshat that the Rebbe doesn't see and hear what's going on. The Rebbe knows everything that's happening in 770. And often or occasionally the behavior, to put it mildly, was much to be desired. You could have behaved better. This was the standard announcement. He would say, Nishstein of Nishkabank, and Nishka milk ketlach, those are any benches, any milk boxes. And then he would finish, Medavisin, Kedishas Hayoim, Kedishas Hamukim. You have to know the holiness of the day and the holiness of the place. Medavisin vi mishtayt and vavemet mishtayt. Where we're standing and in front of whom we're standing. So what used to happen was, it became a big joke. Because everybody knew the announcement by heart, they heard it so many times. So when he would get to the end, there was like in many shuls, when they finish an aliyah, the whole shul sings the last couple of words. So the whole 770 would sing together. It became a joke. Now Moshe Pinchas wasn't making any jokes. Rebbe Moshe Pinchas Katz, all of a sudden. When he said it, he was saying, listen, you're standing in front of the Rebbe, act that way. That was his intent. So when it became this, like the whole shul would sing it, so 1 year he didn't finish. He said, "Medavis and kedishas hayoim and kedishas hamukim." He stopped. What's the point of, if people are not going to take what he's saying seriously? What's the point of saying? The Rebbe turned around to label Gronos over Shalom. I hate to say it. And the Rebbe asked, "What's happened to the end of the announcement?" And Rabbi Katz had to go back and say, "Medavis and." The Rebbe wanted him to say it. You should know where you're standing and in front of whom you're standing. Now, 1 year, maybe more than 1 year, there was an addition made to this announcement. And I remember where I was standing when I heard this addition, and clearly it was added because the Rebbe said to add it, and something must have happened, where somebody must have told the Rebbe that he's not coming to 770 because there's no room for him, or he was told there was no room, something to that effect. So Rabbi Katz, who always made these announcements, this probably happened in 1979, 78, 79, Rabbi Katz added more words. He said, you have to know that the doors of 770 are open, and every Jew in the world is welcome. And nobody has right to say to another Jew that there's no room for you in 770. The Rebbe added that. You should know that the doors of 770 are open, and every Jew in the world is welcome. Nobody has a right to say to another Jew, Tali Amokum, there's no room for you. This was important to the Rebbe, and that's what the Rebbe is talking about. The Rebbe Shul, Beis Chayenu, Beis whatever you want to call it, Beis Chabad, Beis Lubavitch, Beis Agudas Chasidi Chabad, Beis, that 770 is Begematria Paratzta. The Rebbe wanted people should be able to come to his house, to his shul. And he continues. And all of the excuses that we all think, that it's not his concern, it's somebody else's concern. It's comparable to what we find. It's the same kind of things that caused the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, many, many years ago. And people said, it's not my department, it's not my business, it's not my concern. That nevertheless, Afal Pikein Omer Razal, it says in the Gemara, that Kol Doyer, She'ein Nivne Beis HaMikdash, B'yom of any generation, in whose times the Beis HaMikdash is not built, Malin Allah of Kilu Hecherive, bottom of page 212, it's as though it was destroyed. So it's Rebbe saying it's everybody's business. If and when and how 770 is built, says the Rebbe, is the concern of every one of us. It should be the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shebekarav Mamish, that's very quickly. Yishlach HaKadosh Baruch Hu as Mashiach Tzidkenu. Lamata Me'asar Tzvachim, the Eibush will send Mashiach. V'az lo yitzerech b'veitis basar b'dam, you're not going to have the efforts of people. Sheyamid Beis Mikdash L'tfilah. a sanctuary for prayer. Beis Mikdash Limud Torah, a sanctuary for learning Torah. Beis Mikdash Limud Pnimius HaTorah, a sanctuary for learning Chasidus. Ki Mashiach Binyan B'dei Shamayim, the Eibush is going to build it. Like it says in the Chazal, Shu Kvar Bonui U'Mishuchlal, it's already built and prepared. V'yigale v'yave mishamayim, it'll be revealed and descend from heaven. V'yum shach lamata masar tvachim, will come into this world. It'll be the Eibush will build a house. Now I want to say a couple of things about this idea. That first of all, there's a machlokes about this. There's two opinions that the Rishonim. If the third Beis Hamikdash is built by Mashiach or is built by the Eibush, the Rambam paskins v'yivne Beis Hamikdash b'mkoyme. It's one of the tasks of Mashiach. The other Rishonim that say that's going to come from heaven. And the Rebbe Kedarki Kodesh makes them both right. He makes a compromise. The Rebbe says that one part is going to build Bidei Adam, one part is going to be built by people, and another part, the Rebbe has 4 different sichas, and in each sicha he says something different. And the rest of it is going to come from heaven. One oifen the Rebbe says is the doors. Another oifen is that everything we know about how we should build Bayit Shlishi from Yecheskel will build. And all the things that we're not sure about, that will come in Hashamayim. There's different, the Rebbe has 4 different sichas, they were malakat 4 different places, we have 4 different hesbedim about what's going to be B'dei Adam, what's going to be B'dei Shamayim. Which means human effort is always necessary. So I don't think the Rebbe is excluding this here, even though he's saying people seem to have a very hard time getting around to building 770. When Mashiach comes and every will build 770. But there's still work that everybody has an obligation to do. V'ad oz, and until then, yitztarchu mistama lehitaltel valgen zich bolomis, holes. Until then, we're going to have to roll around in the holes until someone gets their act together and build 770. And that happened. It happened within a year or two. They built the shul, and the Rebbe was able to fabring here. And there's photographs of the development of the first shul of 770. I want you to know. I mean, now you don't see it anymore. But when they built the first shul, they put in 5 chandeliers. 5 chandeliers. A Hasidic shul, the Rebbe's shul with chandeliers. So there was a Yid who came here and he saw the chandeliers and says, these chandeliers, they're for sure in a Sarusa de Layela. Chassidim would never think in their wildest dreams that in the Rebbe's shul there should be chandeliers. And the fact was, the chandeliers were donated by the Rebbe's and Chaya Mushka. She went and she picked them, she chose them, and she donated it. She paid for the chandeliers because if it had not been the Rebbe's and Chaya Mushka, you remember the chandeliers? Yeah, the Rebbe's shul. So the first shul was actually very pretty. You didn't have any beams. Yeah. The 5 chandeliers were all in this space, till that thicker beam. There were 4 corners, and there was one in the middle, which hung down a little bit lower. And the first shul was actually very pretty. It was paneled, and paneling in 1960 was already considered then modern. Yeah, it was a tiled floor, and there were no beams. There were no beams in the middle. There were no poles. It was just a room. And there was plenty in the when they first built it, there was plenty of room. Within 2, 3, 4 years, it was packed. And when they extended the shul, they started putting in beams. So then 770 took on its famous, its famous look of being perpetually under construction. She did not donate chandeliers for the middle shul and for the last shul, but the Rebbetzin donated 5 chandeliers. When they lowered the ceiling after Gimel Tamuz, they removed these chandeliers. I don't know why, and I don't have to know why. It's not my department. Well, the Rebbe just said it's everybody's business, so I'm saying it's not my business. And the Rebbe's not happy about people saying it's not their business. But they removed the chandeliers. You could see in the pictures. And when they had the first shul, it was actually very pretty. The Rebbe used to sit right here. This is the Rebbe's spot on the bimah. And it was a very beautiful shul. So the Rebbe continues. V'yazer Hashem Yizbarach, the Eibusha should help, she'yezeh l'shah kala b'yez. That the continuation of the Golus, when we have to wander to find a place for making a fabring, it should be for a very short time, because sha'ad mocha v'abeket till tomorrow morning, yuchlu lahamshich lehizvayit yachad, we should be able to continue fabringing, beivin shal rechava in a way that's comfortable and broad, harchev, pichav amalei, open up your mouth and I'll fill it. And the Rebbe means physical archava, a place which is comfortable for people to sit, leirak b'divrei Torah, not just in words of Torah, elagam begashmi, it's also physically, bibinyonim gashmim kipshutam, with physical houses, physical buildings that people can enter into, that have walls and have a ceiling and that have a floor, and they don't have floods on the floor and freezing cold and boiling hot and street noises, and it could be tempered, hot in the winter and cool in the summer and so on. Here's the point, bottom line. after articulating how frustrated I am. Nobody feels responsible for this. Here's the bottom line. And now the Rebbe continues the tangent. The next paragraph is a hemshech of the same tangent. V'teikaf, and immediately it's tarech lizbein biyatzmi. The Rebbe says, I'm sitting here complaining that the people whose job it is to see to it that the shul of the Rebbe should be comfortable and large and expansive and beautiful, which is every Lubavitcher. The Rebbe says, well, guess what? Then I have to ask myself, where am I in all of this? And the Rebbe says in the parenthesis in Yiddish, Kukun of Zich, to examine myself. K'maimer Baal Shem Tov, like the famous teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, which the Rebbe brings in Kama V'Kama Sichas. Shekashereyim chisaron eitzel azulas, when we see a fault in somebody else, harei ze siman, this is the proof, sha'achasaron hu etzlei, the fault is by us. Ubenidin didan, says the Rebbe, it must be that ilu lo yehoye etzli had simtzum. If I didn't have a narrowness in my approach, and the Rebbe says in Yiddish, the farkwetschkeit, a sense of suppression, lo yehoye hadova bo b'yisrach v'seitzel acher. It wouldn't be by others. In other words, others would not be as farfetched as they are. Ilu hoise etzli harchova, if I had in my mind and in my attitude a breath, had a mizman already a long time ago, hoise kol New York, the whole city of New York would have been the beginner's Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, the level of the third Beis HaMikdash. V'imkein areizu hashmos. Imagine the Rebbe saying this in a fabringen, in public. This is my fault. Ubeglali sevel kol hakolam, because of me the whole community suffers. Yachem kol hanashim hatzidkoniyas v'abonis hatzidkoniyas, the righteous women and the righteous girls, the mataf, the pitzlach kind and the little children, hakloim ben, rely on them. Women's sections in 770 never had good mazel. Never. Maybe the first shul. I don't know how long ago you came here, so I don't know what you remember. You remember the first shul? You don't remember?
I remember one shul. When I came in 69 with one shul.
So it was two shul. If you came in 69, they already had, the second part was built already, yeah? The second part was built already. They built it in Chavtes. Anyway, but the women, you asked Mrs. Engels, and she used to come to these classes a lot when she was able to. The women literally stood outside. They would do the men. You're in 67, so you remember the first shul.
Yeah.
The first shul was.
Right after the 6 day.
The shul was beautiful. The first shul was very pretty. Right, and then right, yeah, and there were no poles in the middle, and it was very symmetrical. And Mistama the Weiber shul was also nicht schlecht. The women always suffered. Before they built the first shul, the men were under a tarpaulin. The women used to push it stand outside, literally outside. There was a little shtickle wall. The neighbors in the apartment building were upset. They were making noise in the middle of the night, and they would throw things at the ladies because the men were under the tarpaulin. The women would bear the brunt of the fact that the 770 was doing what 770 did in a way that was disturbing the neighborhood. So the Rebbe says that the Hashem has to help that I should no longer have that kind of liability. Yirachem Hashem Yizbarach Alai V'Aleichem. The Rebbe finishes, Hashem Shel Rachmanas on me and all of us, B'Techeichi Klal Yisrael, amongst the collective of Jewish people, U'Mitech Simcha U'Tov Levav, and with joy and with U'Menucha and calm and a good heart, Yavias Mashiach Tzidkenu, bring Mashiach Tzidkenu, Lamata Masarat Tvach. Yachadim Habayis Gadol, along with the large home, which of course is an allusion to the building, 770 also. Simply speaking, the Bayis Gadol goes on the Beis HaMikdash. But there's many interpretations, which includes also Malkim Shemegadle Beiteira, not just the Beis HaMikdash proper, but any house of God where they raise Torah, Beis HaMedrash. Umalkim Shemegadlim Beitfila, in a place where they raise davening, Beis HaKnesset. Ve'ein Mikra Yoitim De Pshuta, the pasuk has to be understood literally, that it should be a very, very large house, and at the same time, it should be Beisei HaPrati Shegolachat MiYisrael, the private home of every individual Jew, Shegam Hu Yihi Yabayis Gadol, that also should be a larger edifice. Now in 163 it says Chaser Siyum Masicha. Now this is a weekday Fabrengen, and there's a tape of it. So either the tape got cut off, or I'd love to get a hold of the tape and hear what it is that someone decided not to include, because it must have been even sharper than what the Rebbe said until now. Now, Rabbi say, until Rabbi Blooming comes, I'm going to start the next Sicha. I came very late, and I feel very bad about it. So we're going to start the next Sicha, okay? But we're not reading straight. I'm skipping. I want you to go to page 215, okay? Now, this is a Yud Beis Tamuz Sicha, and we're already holding Chaf Aleph Menachem. Because we have a custom here in Beis Medrash and Nashim Abana 770 that Mondays and Tuesdays we learn Sichas from 60 years ago. That's the Seder. We learn the Sichas from 60 years before. And the way we do it is we obviously don't learn all the Sichas. We pick and choose whatever it is that fancies my tickle, whatever I think I want to do. So this was Yud Beis Tamuz. And like I said, we got dragged out because of all kinds of distractions. So Rabbi Blooming is here. I'm just going to tell you what we're doing. The Sicha that we're going to begin in Mitzvah Hashem next week, Monday, B'li Neder, is the Sicha to Neshei Chabad. That's why we're learning the Sicha. It's a Sicha about Jewish women, and it's connected to the Parshas Shavua, Parshas Balak. Okay, so now I will stop.